All right, so let's start with motivation, of course, as always. There is a verse from Shantideva's 6th chapter. It's verse number 113. So for those of you who are familiar with the way of the Bodhisattva or Bodhisattva's guide to a Bodhisattva's way of life, there's one verse, it reads, "A Buddha's qualities are gained from sentient beings and the Buddha alike." So Buddha's qualities, spiritual qualities, in particular those of full enlightenment, they are gained from sentient beings and the Buddhas alike. So why do I not respect sentient beings in the same way as I respect the Buddhas? So this is, of course, part of everything we discussed so far about generating great compassion for all sentient beings, and based on that type of compassion, the aspiration to become fully enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, which is preceded, great compassion is preceded by what Geshe Jumba calls a sense of endearment, or affectionate love, as it's usually called. Affectionate love is a mind that feels affectionate towards sentient beings, has a sense of endearment, but also a regard for sentient beings, which means respect and esteem. That's so beautiful, isn't it? That kind of mind. So to have regard for sentient beings, to have a sense of closeness, of course, based on a sense of closeness, then that regard, that respect and esteem for sentient beings. And then once that has been developed, then the wish for sentient beings to be free, for all sentient beings to be free from any type of, well, samsaric suffering, but even more so, to be free from any type of limitation. So to wish for sentient beings, in other words, to be liberated or even enlightened. And to wish for oneself to protect sentient beings from anything that is in the way to attaining liberation and enlightenment. As part of great compassion. This is also something Lama Tsongkhapa mentions. We'll probably get through, well, maybe not, but very soon cover that particular part. All right. And it's only because they are sentient beings that we can attain the enlightened state of a Buddha. We need Buddhas, of course, but equally we need other sentient beings. So we greatly respect the Buddhas, but are pretty indifferent towards sentient beings, right? Or even worse, some we don't even like. Can't stand their sight. Yeah. All right, so let's meditate a moment on that particular verse. Buddha's qualities are gained from sentient beings and Buddhas alike. Okay. So therefore it makes sense to respect sentient beings in the same way as we would respect the Buddhas. Based on the understanding that sentient beings are just like us, and wanting to be free from suffering, and be satisfied and happy. Let's generate affectionate love, that sense of endearment and regard for sentient beings. with the sense that sentient beings are part of me. Based on that, let's then generate great compassion, wishing for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes. And even more so, wishing to protect sentient beings. From whatever prevents them to attain liberation and enlightenment. Since we can only really protect other sentient beings as well as ourselves once we become fully enlightened, let's generate the sincere aspiration to actualize our fullest potential in the form of the enlightened state of Buddha. For the benefit of each and every sentient being. And so without letting go of that motivation, let's recite the prayers. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. All right, great. Now we got to page, where did we get to? Page 60, well, 60 in the Kindle version of Illuminating the Intent. If you have the PDF, it's 65. If you have the book, it's 50, or the other way around. Forget that. I think it's 50 if you've got the book, yeah, and 65 if you've got the PDF. All right, a few things. Well, what did we cover so far? We spent a lot of time on great compassion. So I'm not going to go into much detail, but to give you a short summary. In the first verse, we heard Chandrakirti explain that compassion is the root of any spiritual practice, and not just compassion, great compassion. So a mind that wishes for all sentient beings, not a single sentient being being left out, for all sentient beings to be free from samsaric suffering, but taking it even further, to any kind of limitations that prevent a person not only from being liberated, but also from becoming fully enlightened. And at the same time, the wish to help sentient beings to achieve that. That is described as great compassion. And in this particular text, it's even more stressed, it's even more emphasized than bodhicitta. Because bodhicitta basically runs on great compassion. The aspiration to become enlightened, of course, is driven by great compassion, that aspiration to be of benefit to sentient beings in the best possible way. And so as we've heard, yes, so the first verse is basically telling us great compassion is the root of any practice, even practices of the fundamental vehicle. Because even hearers and solitary realizers depend on Buddhas. Buddhas depend on themselves having been bodhisattvas, and you only become a bodhisattva if you have generated great compassion. Therefore, hearers and solitary realizers also depend, or followers of the fundamental vehicle also depend on great compassion. In the second verse, we've heard that great compassion is extremely important at all times. So once you generate great compassion and you progress on the path to, well, hopefully full enlightenment, this being the main goal in this tradition. Wow, I'm dripping. Okay, this is better, thank you. Ooh, it's so hot. In this tradition, of course, the emphasis is on actualizing our fullest potential in the form of full enlightenment. And so once we embark on the path to the state of a Buddha, well, great compassion is important in the beginning, obviously, but it's also important in the middle, because we won't keep going, right? I mean, starting in the beginning, it's difficult enough. Samsara, it's good things, you know, I like my samsara, the splendors of samsara, as Lama Tsongkhapa calls it in his 3 principal aspects of the path. We're pretty much attached to them. And so to set off, to start off is difficult. But then while we're on the path, to continue, why are we doing this, right? I mean, going through all these difficulties, practicing, transforming our mind for the benefit of other sentient beings. Again, driven by great compassion. And even a Buddha, someone who has actualized their fullest potential, who is now able, who has removed any obstructions from their mind. We briefly discussed this before. Our mind is temporarily obstructed by, well, they're called cognitive obscurations or afflictive obscurations, the 2 types of obscurations that are not in the nature of our mind, so they can be removed. And once they've been removed from our mind does what it does best. What is the nature of our mind? To know things. I mean, even now we can know certain things, but our knowledge is very limited due to the obscurations on our own mind. Our misperceptions of reality, of course, basically or mainly, and the imprints or the residues that were left on our mind because of these misconceptions of realities, those wrong views. But Buddha has totally eliminated these, and now the Buddha, being omniscient, knows everyone's mind and knows best how everyone can reach that same state. Knows the person's predispositions, their interests, their karmic seeds and so forth. But if a Buddha were lacking great compassion, they wouldn't teach others, right? So great compassion is also needed. Of course, a Buddha's mind would always have great compassion. So it's not like, some Buddhas, it's a little tricky. They've kind of lost their great compassion. That's not going to happen. But just to stress that this mind is important at all times. In the beginning, like a seed. In the middle, like water. Like it's compared to planting a seed in the ground. And then in the end, reaping the harvest. So in the beginning, like the seed, compassion is like the seed, extremely important. Then in the middle, it's like water and fertilizer, adding water and fertilizer. That's like on the path. And at the very end, it's like the harvest. You reap that excellent harvest of Buddhahood, and even at that time, it's extremely important. All right, and then secondly, well, that's the second verse. Then in the third verse, we were introduced to the three types of compassion, three types of great compassion. The first type of great compassion is said to be, is described as compassion that focuses only on sentient beings, focuses only on other sentient beings. And the verse that Chandrakirti composed, the third verse that describes the first type of compassion, well, he tells us how to generate great compassion. So he mentions what he's talking about is that first type of great compassion, but he tells us how we can develop it. First of all, we need to focus on our self. Like, how do we end up being in samsara? What are the causes for our existence, of our samsaric existence? Well, it's the misconception holding on to an inherently existent I, which gives rise to the mind, or the misconception of an inherently existent mind, together with other misconceptions with regard to other sentient beings. But the main problem is perceiving ourselves to exist inherently, and that which belongs to me, my friends and so forth, as inherently existent. That's the main problem. Geshe Thupten Jinpa here calls it identity view. Usually it's translated as the view of the transitory collection. But I like identity view. I think it's a good translation. So it's that misperception which then leads to mental projection. I'm using Geshe Thupten Jinpa's translation of that particular type of mind. I've translated it so far as the exaggerating attitude. It's a mind that, based on that rude misperception or misconception, then exaggerates the importance of the self and that which is mine. Right? I'm the center of the universe. I'm more important. My happiness is more important. That's a type of mind that arises from the root misconception. And then that sense of my happiness is more important, I'm more important, my happiness, my friends and so forth are more important, gives rise to attachment to I and mine. Again, with that inflated sense, I'm more important, I'm more precious. And all of us have that, not just on a coarser mental level, but also on a subtler mental level. And based on that, of course, all the other afflictions arise. Therefore, Chandrakirti is saying, look at your own situation and then look at other sentient beings. Once we recognize ourselves, recognize our own predicament, that we are driven, that we're totally controlled by our misconception, and even worse, that inflated sense of ourselves and the resulting attachment to I and mine. Again, inflating our importance and so forth. That's why we can never be truly satisfied. We can never be truly peaceful. There's always some worry about I and mine. Even there's a great moment, everything is great, we're with our friends, the sun is shining, the food is delicious, we're comfortable, but it won't last. A few moments of possible pure satisfaction, but before long, there's a sense of this is missing, that is missing, maybe worry about tomorrow, maybe resenting what happened before, and so forth. That is simply because we have that misconception, and of course then our self-centeredness, which is, well, it's an English word, self-centeredness. Yes, it's a good word actually, but what does it mean? It's an attachment. It's a type of attachment, holding on to I, me and mine, basically. So we're experiencing this particular mind, and therefore the absence of true peace and true satisfaction, but we're just one person. Big deal. So many sentient beings do as well. And in our case, we've made the time, we have the interest to learn about samsara, about how to remove the afflictions and so forth. Well, limitless sentient beings have no clue, have no interest, are interested in just continuing their existence in samsara and making things even worse for themselves. So based on that understanding, we generate great compassion. We generate compassion for sentient beings. Look around. I mean, so much energy and time wasted on what? On things that just keep us trapped longer and make things even worse. But not just that, Chandrakirti also mentions this analogy, he gives us this analogy of the water wheel. I've come to the conclusion, the analogy, we had different versions of the analogy too, at the very least, right? This water wheel, traditionally used in India. Initially, I thought it's like a wheel, like a crank wheel. You've got a rope attached to it with a bucket at the bottom, and then you turn the wheel and the bucket goes down into the well. But the thing is, you have to turn it probably towards the left, so against, what's it called, anti-clockwise, and then if you want to move the bucket up, you have to turn it clockwise, right? And then in that way the bucket goes up and down. And that's the analogy for sentient beings basically being the bucket, basically being reborn in lower realms of existence, experiencing a lot of suffering, and then every now and then they're reborn in higher states. But it's so much easier, just as it's so much easier to release the bucket into the well, it's so much easier to be reborn in lower states with more suffering, and it's so much harder to raise the bucket again, the full bucket with water this time. So similarly, it's just as difficult to be reborn in higher states. And there's this continuous turning. So that was one way to look at the analogy. Then Geshe Thupten Jinpa, according to his translation, you have many buckets on a water wheel. And they used to exist, the photos you find online of like a wheel with lots of buckets on them, tied to them by a rope. Here the rope is symbolic for karma and affliction. And all these buckets go down into the well or into a river. And so some of them are full, so it's harder to bring up the wheel again. For the ones that are empty, on one side they've been emptied, it's easier on that side. And what operates the wheel is the mind. I mean, the person actually turning the wheel is symbolic for the mind. But I was thinking, many buckets? We're just one bucket. One mind, one person. So maybe you have a wheel with one bucket attached only. Right? Instead of many buckets attached all around it, if you were to just tie one bucket to it and it goes down, it comes up again. And in that way you have that continuous movement. You don't have to go this way and the other way around in order to raise and raise the bucket and let it go down again, but instead you keep turning, right? Anyway, whichever analogy you'd like to use, it's not really clear from the text, but it gives us a sense of ourselves. Think of the cycle, the 12 links of dependent arising, if you're familiar with them. First there's the misconception, there's ignorance that leads to other afflictions, that leads to karma, and so forth, and so, you know, like being reborn in samsara again and again because of karma and afflictions. Beautifully explained in the 12 links. And so first we think about it on our own example, thinking ourselves how we are trapped, how we after this life reborn again, doing it all over again, making the same mistakes again. Maybe it's a little better than this life, but who knows what comes afterwards, and so forth. So first we think of it on our own example, and then we think of it based on other sentient beings. Think of other sentient beings, how they are trapped. And again, generate great compassion. That's verse number 3. So we've gone this far, we've come this far. Now verse number 4 talks about the second and the third type of great compassion. Now last time I made a mistake. I told you something that's not true. Well, partly not true. I don't know how I got so confused about it. Any clue what's up? I'm trying to keep the discussion group open so for questions. So someone asked, Any clue what's up? I don't know what that means. Okay. What I told you last time was the second type of compassion is great compassion, in the same way as before, a mind that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes, basically, but conjoined with an understanding of the impermanence of sentient beings. Okay, so that's okay. So conjoined can mean two different things. But in general, without going into those two, in general it means if a mind is conjoined with great compassion, then that mind influences great compassion. It enhances great compassion. So if you have an understanding of the impermanence of sentient beings, you've understood the impermanence of sentient beings, and if that mind is now conjoined with your great compassion, your great compassion enhances. I mean, it seems like great compassion, how can it enhance? It's already great. But I mean, of course, that's just the term we use, great compassion. But enhance means it becomes even stronger, more powerful. Yeah, so the strength of it being enhanced means, well, any kind of obstacle, any kind of opposing force will make it much harder for that compassion to lose in strength, for instance. And at some point, yes, well, it's impossible to lose the strength of that type of compassion, and instead it just increases ever more to such a degree until it is totally effortless. In the mind of a Buddha, great compassion is totally effortless. In our continuum, even once we become bodhisattvas, there's still a type of effort required. But the point is, it grows stronger and stronger, and not just in and of itself, but through the help of wisdom. Understanding, for instance, subtle impermanence. Sentient beings being impermanent, changing constantly. We've discussed it last time. I mean, knowing that sentient beings and their experiences are impermanent, that shows us that their suffering won't always be there. In fact, it's different from moment to moment, and if the right kind of causes and conditions are applied, it can be reduced and eventually be overcome. Which means our understanding of reality, I mean, we understand reality in that sense. That compassion is not just wishful thinking that is totally in contradiction to reality, but instead it's possible to remove suffering. Anyway, so having said a mind that is conjoined with compassion, wisdom that is conjoined with compassion, means that it influences compassion. Now, this is a difficult concept. I've discussed it earlier, but for those who weren't here, in our everyday life, there are also minds that can influence our other awarenesses, especially strong emotions. Talking about ordinary emotions, I usually give the example of falling in love with someone, a very strong emotion, right? If you're newly in love, then all your other minds perceive things in a really positive way. I mean, I keep saying, I don't know, even if it rains the whole time, it seems like pink clouds in the sky, and the food always tastes good, even if it's not your favorite food. I mean, I may be exaggerating here, but depending on the degree of, I don't know, fascination with that person or love for that person, it influences all our experiences, right? I mean, everything becomes wonderful. And it's not like every mind is the mind that is in love, but it influences our other perceptions. Or, taking a negative kind of example, if you're grieving, if someone really close to you has just passed away, and you're so sad and so, I don't know, desperate because this person is gone now. Well, even if the grief is not manifest, if you're thinking of something else, you're preparing food or whatever, everything is kind of toned down. Your experiences are not as vivid, and you don't enjoy things to the same degree. To me, this is a good example how a particular mind, especially like a strong emotion, can affect our other minds. Whether you would call them conjoined, that's a different matter. But to just have an everyday kind of example, let's now go back to great compassion. Well, great compassion can be conjoined with other minds as well. The wish to practice the Dharma. So the wish to practice the Dharma, if it's conjoined with great compassion, you may be much more motivated. If it was just for myself, right? If for my own benefit, that wish to, I don't know, attain spiritual realizations just for my own benefit. If that mind, that aspiration were to be conjoined with my wish to now sit down and meditate, it probably wouldn't be strong enough because it's just for one person. But if I'm driven by great compassion, the wish to be of benefit to all sentient beings, and based on that, or conjoined with that mind, I now sit down to meditate, different mind, right? Different drive. It's for every sentient being. So for them, I'm going to do this now, and I don't want to let them down. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. So you see how this particular emotion, in this case, great compassion, can affect other types of mind, can enhance them. In this case, the wish to practice. But now taking it to a more advanced level, the level of a bodhisattva, where you have great compassion conjoined with wisdom, then that understanding of, for instance, subtle impermanence, constant change of, well, especially sentient beings, or the emptiness of sentient beings, the wisdom that understands the emptiness, the ultimate nature, the lack of inherent existence of sentient beings, if that's conjoined with great compassion is greatly enhanced. Okay. Now, the second type of compassion, as I said earlier, is conjoined with the mind that realizes impermanence, the impermanence of sentient beings. But there are two ways in which a mind can be conjoined with another mind. Great compassion is actively there, so it's actively present right now. And if that great compassion is conjoined now with the wisdom realizing the impermanence of sentient beings, then either that mind that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings lies dormant, but still influences. It lies dormant, it's not active, but it can still influence the great compassion, or it's also actively there. Both are there at the same time. With great compassion enhancing wisdom, and wisdom enhancing great compassion. So here the terminology that is used in the case of great compassion that is manifest, that is active, but wisdom lying dormant, we say that the wisdom is indirectly conjoined with great compassion, only indirectly, because it's not actively there. Wisdom is not actively there. But if wisdom and great compassion are both there, the focus being on great compassion, it is conjoined with wisdom, it is directly conjoined with wisdom, directly. That's the word, musu simba, shula simba, that's the term that's used in Tibetan. So it literally translates to indirectly conjoined, if that which is conjoined lies dormant, or directly conjoined, if that which is conjoined is actively there. So last time I told you that the wisdom lies dormant, and that was my mistake. I confused it with something else, and when I got home I realized, oh no, they're both actively there, of course, which is really mind-boggling, right? I mean, it's hard enough to have great compassion, but then to realize the impermanence of sentient beings at the same time, it seems impossible. And I don't think ordinary beings can really do. I think you need a certain degree of concentration and discipline to have both minds operate at the same time. Really difficult. So that shows us we still got a lot of work to do, but the possibilities. Because if a bodhisattva can do it, we can all do it. I mean, unless you're already bodhisattvas, I can't tell. But in my own case, I know I've got a lot of work left, a lot of work still to be done, but the possibilities, it's amazing. We can actually generate, first of all, a type of compassion that is so strong that everything I do, well, not everything I do, but not everything I do is influenced by that great compassion, but it can become influenced by that great compassion. Let's put it that way. The more I generate it, the more whatever I do is basically for the benefit of other sentient beings, right? And so self-centeredness loses its grip, it's weakened, and in its place, first of all, and that should not be our main reason for doing it, but it's just a pleasant side effect, we'll be so much happier, so much more satisfying, so much less worry and so forth. Because interestingly, if we just think of ourselves, we worry about ourselves. But if we're dedicating ourselves for the benefit of all sentient beings, we don't worry about them, right? Because it's not based on attachment. We only worry, we get unhappy if we have attachment towards, if it's attachment towards ourselves, then we worry about ourselves. If it's attachment for another person, if we attach to another person, then we worry about them, right? But here it's free from attachment. It's just the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. It's based on reality, but it's not that exaggeration, inflating the importance of sentient beings, or, for instance, attachment for another person. I worry that they may leave me, for instance, because I'm exaggerating their importance. I'm thinking I can only be happy if I'm around that person. If that person is not there, I can't be happy, which is not realistic. Because before we met that person, we were perfectly happy. And even if then we separate, after some time we get over it and we're still happy, we're happy again. So it can't be that we can only be happy if we're around this person, which shows our attachment is not in accordance with reality. Nonetheless, it creates a lot of, or maybe because of that, because it's not based on reality, it leads to worry, it leads to dissatisfaction, it leads to, unpleasant states. But great compassion is not like that. It's based on reality, and although we're focusing on the suffering of all sentient beings, instead of leading to depression, it gives us incredible inner strength. Because for our own sake, we may work hard, but if it's based on attachment, we easily grow tired. But it's for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not based on attachment, and it gives us this incredible inner strength. Now, combined with the understanding of the impermanence of sentient beings, as I said earlier, it certainly doesn't lead to depression, because it's based on the understanding suffering can change. All right. So anyway, that's the second type of compassion, great compassion, a mind that is directly conjoined. So first, what you do is this. First, you generate an understanding, you meditate on the impermanence of sentient beings, meditate on that. All sentient beings, mind and body, they're constantly changing. So you become familiar with that. And once you've done so, you then generate compassion for all these sentient beings. It's a second mind. It's not the same mind. It's two minds. One that is aware, that knows the constant change of sentient beings, and the other one that wishes for them to be free from suffering. Two different minds. So the type of compassion that is directly conjoined with that wisdom, is the compassion described as, what was it called? Compassion that takes phenomenal reality as its object. Compassion that takes phenomenal reality, or that takes phenomena as its object. Here, phenomena is the impermanence of sentient beings, right? It's a little misleading because it's saying compassion takes that as its object. They're different minds. Yeah, the language is a little misleading here. It actually is, in English as well as in Tibetan. compassion that takes phenomena, that takes impermanence of sentient beings as its object. It's actually not the great compassion that does that. It's just called that. Really what happens is the person who has great compassion, not only do they focus on sentient beings and wish for them to be free from suffering, right? Engage in that mental compassion. On top of that, they also understand the phenomena, this phenomenal reality of sentient beings, which is their impermanence, and therefore take it as an object. So it's not literally great compassion that takes phenomena as its object, but since it's conjoined, I guess that's why it's called that. Anyway, it's not as wordy as if you were to explain it with more words. So therefore, great compassion, the second type of compassion. The first type of compassion is called great compassion that focuses only on sentient beings. The second type is called great compassion that takes phenomenal reality or impermanence as its object, which is another way of saying that is conjoined with the mind that takes phenomena as its object. Here, phenomena referring to the impermanence of sentient beings. So don't get caught up in the term, it's just what it's called. But basically to understand, to say it again, it's great compassion that at the same time is enhanced by that mind that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings, with both minds being equally active. The second type of mind, as I mentioned before, is called I'm trying to think, in Tibetan it's so easy. It's very short. In English it's called great compassion that takes no reference as its object. Non-referential great compassion, if you want to shorten it even further. So non-referential great compassion, which is basically saying great compassion, which at the same time, non-referential. So great compassion that is conjoined, directly conjoined with the mind that takes emptiness, non-reference as its object. So it's like no reference. Why do you call emptiness here non-reference? Well, Lama Tsongkhapa explains it in a moment. Here, non-reference means inherent existence, right? So reference means inherent existence. So a non-referential mind is a mind that doesn't take inherent existence as its object, that it doesn't even appear in the sense, it may still appear, but its main object perceives the lack of inherent existence, right? Realizes non-reference. Yeah. In Tibetan, it's non-focus, basically. The word is, Geshe chooses the word non-referential. It's literally the word for non-focal. But this word mikba, which can mean focus, has many different meanings in different contexts. So I think in this context, it's a good idea to say non-referential. So yeah, I'd love to explain it in such a way that it's easy to remember what we're talking about. But this terminology is one of the few cases where the words don't literally indicate what is meant. Yeah. Anyway, so non-referential great compassion is great compassion conjoined with the understanding, directly conjoined with the realization that sentient beings lack inherent existence. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, great. All right, so this far we got. And the analogy that is given, this beautiful analogy, and again, it's helpful to use the analogy to meditate. And Lama Tsongkhapa has already said, if you study this text, and you go as far as wanting to explain this text, and you don't practice what's in here. So right now we're talking about great compassion. You become like a parrot. The Tibetans always talk about Abu Netso, means Uncle Parrot reciting Om Mani Padme Hum. Right? A parrot can recite Om Mani Padme Hum, but it doesn't mean anything to a parrot. So we should not be like Agunetsu. We shouldn't be like the Uncle Parrot reciting Om Mani Padme Hum without reflecting on its meaning. Likewise, when we study, reflect and meditate, well, when we study this text, let's put it that way. So when we study this text, we should at the same time practice it. Very important to really put this into practice. We should take it as a meditation manual, if you like. Which is why the analogy here could be helpful in that context. So sentient beings, to reflect on sentient beings, they're like reflections on of the moon in rippling water. Yeah, so you have a body of water and a slight breeze, you know, like a gentle breeze ripples the water, right? And at the same time, the moon, it's at night, so the moon is reflected in the moon, in the water. Now, the ripples of the moon, that's like impermanence. The water is rippling. So the moon is constantly changing. That appearance of the moon is constantly changing. And that is the analogy for impermanence. The moon being reflected in the water, the ripples of the water, so the reflection, the appearance of the moon in the water, constantly changing, is symbolic for impermanence. But the moon itself appearing, not the ripples, or with the ripples, but the moon itself appearing, that is the analogy for emptiness. Right? So sentient beings, not only are they impermanent, symbolized or indicated by the ripples, at the same time they appear to exist inherently, but are not. Just as the moon, the reflection of the moon appears to be the actual moon, while it is not. Does that make sense? Therefore, this analogy, yes, so sentient beings are like ripples in water, they keep changing, and they're like the reflection of the moon in water, because they appear to exist inherently while they're not. So that's what the first two lines of verse number 4 say. Beings, so sentient beings, are like reflections in the moon in rippling water, seeing them as fleeting and as devoid of intrinsic nature. Okay. All right, so we've talked a little bit about this, also how bodhisattvas basically regard sentient beings as being caught in the ocean of ignorance. And that's really what it is, right? The misconception of reality, and it gets replenished by the rivers of ignorance. So in our own case, of course, we have this basic misconception of reality, and we keep replenishing it, we keep renewing it. Again and again, we perceive phenomena as existing in and of itself. So it's not like, oh, one day we forget about it and we figure out how things really exist. It doesn't happen on its own. It'd be great if it would, but no, we keep reinforcing it again and again. Likewise, sentient beings, they're like caught in this river of misconceptions that are constantly renewed. And of course, karma and other afflictions just keep the water churning, keep them trapped in this ocean. So, where did we get to last time? All right, so still page 60. I think we finished that first part, and then it goes on to say the commentary explains. The commentary explains, and that's the auto-commentary, Chandrakirti's commentary on his own verses. The commentary explains that the three types of compassion focusing only on sentient beings, compassion taking phenomena of reality as its object, and non-referential compassion, they are to be distinguished not on the basis of their cognitive aspects, but on the basis of their focal objects. All right, this is a little difficult. This is difficult in English, it's difficult in Tibetan. When we studied this, it was a little difficult because the text here is slightly confusing. Now, talking about cognitive aspects or focal objects tells you something about the mind. Okay. So when you have a consciousness, when you have a mind, and we always have mind, we always have consciousness, even when we're unconscious, we always have consciousness. We just have a subtler mind at that time, but there's still consciousness. And every consciousness always has an object. always has an object. Now, there are two possibilities. Either it's just a single object. For instance, perceiving a table, perceiving a tree, remembering breakfast. That's one case. Well, that's an example of just one object. And then it's possible to have two types of objects, in the sense like perceiving that A is B. Okay? So to perceive, for instance, the fact that this tree is green, or that this tree is, I don't know, a particular type of tree. An oak tree, for instance. So here, A is B, and the A and B are replaced here by, well, A is the tree, and then the oak tree is B. So a particular characteristic of that object. So in this case, you describe the tree that you've seen, that is the focal object, and the oak tree, B, that characteristic of this particular tree, or which category it belongs to, that particular tree, that is described as the cognitive aspect. Now, if you perceive, for instance, the impermanence of this table. The table is impermanent. The focal object is the table. Its impermanence is the cognitive aspect. It's that which you apprehend. So your focus is the table, and you apprehend this table to be impermanent, or big, or made of wood, or whatever. So in this way, when you just have one single object, then that single object, if you just perceive the table, it becomes the focal object and the apprehended object. It's both. However, if you want to indicate that it's not just a single object, but instead there is a basis based on which you perceive it's impermanent, or it's big, or whatever else it is, then you distinguish. It's helpful then to say one is the focal object and one is the apprehended aspect, right? So if I were to ask you, a mind that realizes the emptiness of the self, what is the focal object? The self. What is the apprehended aspect? The emptiness, yeah. Okay. So in that way, it's easier, you have this terminology that helps you to identify the object of something. Now let's take great compassion. Focusing on all, already gave it away. Wishing for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. What is the focal object? All sentient beings to be free from suffering, the apprehended aspect. Now, what happens, an extra difficulty here, is that I don't agree with Geshe Thupten Jinpa's choice of words here. He calls it the cognitive aspect. I don't think that's a good word, because although ordinarily in English to cognize doesn't necessarily mean to incontrovertibly know. It can also mean to perceive or to be aware of. But in a Buddhist context, cognition, a mind that cognizes something, is usually, or cognizer, usually refers to a mind that knows its object. Any terminology you're familiar with in English that implies, are you familiar with, does anything come to mind, any kind of term that comes to mind in Buddhism, a Buddhist term in English that implies this mind knows its object? Using the word cognize or cognizer. Valid cognizer, very good. A valid cognizer is a mind that knows its object, that realizes, that incontrovertibly knows its object. So if I know this is I don't know, this is my spoon, or this is my table, I know incontrovertibly that's a valid cognizer. I may have doubt, and in that case, or I may assume it's my table. However, that's not a valid cognizer because it doesn't incontrovertibly know its object. Okay, another term, cognizer, knowing through inference, inferential cognizer. Inferential cognizer is a mind, it's indicated by the word, It shows you how you come to know something on the basis of a correct reason. For instance, right now I can't see that there is fire in my neighbor's house. Can't see, I can't look inside. But there's smoke billowing out of his window. So based on that, I can infer there is fire in that building. So the mind that now comes to incontrovertibly know there's fire burning in my neighbor's house, that's an inferential cognizer. It's based on a correct reason that I was able to infer. And again, the word inferential cognizer, the word cognizer here means it knows its object. Now going back to great compassion, a mind that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Does that cognize? Does that know its object? No, it's an aspiration. It wishes for something. It doesn't know its object. Doesn't mean it's ignorant. That's not what this means, but it just simply doesn't know or realize its object. It just wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering, which is why I don't know why you use the word cognitive aspects. It apprehends sentient beings being free from suffering. That's what it apprehends. It apprehends it by way of wishing for it. It holds on to, that's its object. But I wouldn't use the word cognitive aspect. I would use the word apprehended aspect. Okay, but anyway, here the commentary explains that the three types of compassion are to be distinguished not on the basis of that cognitive aspect, because they all have the same cognitive aspect, but on the basis of their focal objects. Again, this is like, no, they all focus on they're all great compassion, so they all focus on sentient beings. So it cannot be their focal object. But here it means something very specific. It doesn't mean sentient beings as like the focal object or the focus of great compassion, but here it's saying the focal object of that which it is conjoined with, right? In the case of the first compassion, it's not conjoined with anything. So it just focuses, the person having great compassion in their continuum just focuses on sentient beings because there's no other mind present. But in the case of the second type of compassion, although compassion just focuses simply on sentient beings, but the person in whose continuum that second type of compassion is now active is also focusing on the impermanence of sentient beings with that second mind. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa means here. The focal object is different, but it doesn't mean the focal object of compassion itself, because that's just sentient beings, but it's the focal object of the person, right? The focal object of the person who's now having both minds in their continuum. Like if you focus on the impermanence of sentient beings and on sentient beings, they're both your focal object, right? They're just different types of mind that have these two different objects, but you as a person perceive both. All right? So I think this is how so on the basis of their focal object here, their focal object does not literally mean, in Tibetan it literally says that. And that's a great opportunity to debate. What are you saying? But of course you then need to interpret what this literally means. Okay, so anyway, the apprehended aspect or the cognitive aspect is not the same. Is the same for all three, because the aspect of all three is the wish for sentient beings to be free from suffering. Right? Okay. As such, the three are also similar in taking sentient beings as their object of focus. There you have it. So he says focal object first. Focal object is different, but the object of focus is not. In Tibetan, it's just as confusing. And Geshe Trungpa does a great job translating it exactly. The confusion comes across in English as well. Right? So the object of focus is just sentient beings. The focal object here must be interpreted to mean what the person perceives. The impermanence of sentient beings and sentient beings, or the emptiness of sentient beings and sentient beings. It's really not that difficult if the text wasn't formulated in such a difficult way. But it keeps us on our toes, so that's good. For instance, in the context of the first compassion, the commentary states, or Chandrakirti says in his auto commentary, having become compassionate for transmigrating beings. While in the context of the two, this I can leave out, we did that last time. So he's just saying, if you look at the commentary, all three types of compassion are focused on transmigrating beings, but it's not mentioned in all three cases. So never mind. We did focus on that last time. This is just saying that the three types of compassions are focused on all transmigrating beings is the same for all three of them, even if the auto commentary doesn't make it clear. It's implied. Okay, so I'll leave out that paragraph because I just remember I read it last time. Anyway, it's not that important. But then it goes on to say, within the awareness that ascertains sentient beings to be disintegrating moment by moment, mind realizing emptiness, right? Realizing impermanence, right? So within this awareness that ascertains sentient beings to be disintegrating moment by moment, oh, yes, it gets even harder. The apprehension of sentient beings as permanent, unitary, and autonomous ceases. Ooh. Okay. Yeah. If you've already studied for many years, for instance, Prajna, then what I just said would make total sense. But never mind, if you haven't, I'll just explain it. This is a very interesting phenomenon here. First of all, we all perceive ourselves to exist inherently. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? It basically means inherent is just another way of saying naturally. In a sense, if something exists naturally, you don't need anything else for it to be this, that, and the other. We say, for instance, water is naturally wet. You don't need anything else for water to be wet. Right? That's our sense ordinarily. I remember Geshe Thupten Belsang, he once gave this example. He said, if I were to ask you, is water naturally hot? What would you say? No, it's not, right? No, it's not naturally hot because it depends on a source of heating, for instance. I don't know, a cooking stove for water to be hot. So it depends on something else to be hot. Therefore, we don't say it is inherently or naturally hot. But is water inherently wet or naturally wet? And we would say yes, right? That's conventionally true. However, from a Buddhist point of view, it's not naturally wet because it depends on something other than water to be wet. Hydrogen and oxygen. Neither hydrogen is water, nor oxygen is water, right? Right? So, two hydrogen, it depends on each of these two hydrogens, it depends on that oxygen. So, therefore, even water, in the strictest sense, is not inherently or naturally wet because it depends on something other than itself to be wet. Now, taking it back to the I, is there an inherent and naturally existent I? No, because it depends on other things to be there. It depends, at the very least, and on the subtlest level, on labeling. When I say I have the thought I, that is just labeled on the basis of my body and my mind. It seems I could find that I, right? I have a sense there is this I. That's not just my mind thinking I, and therefore there is an I. When I say my mind thinking I, I'm not saying it's thinking so randomly. It's on the basis of imputation. There's a valid basic. For instance, when my hand writes a letter, I label I write a letter. Right? Actually, that's writing the letter, it's my hand. There's not an invisible I that parallel to my hand is writing a letter, right? That would be absurd. Where's that I? It feels that way, right? I'm writing a letter at the same time as My mind is writing a letter. Or I'm walking. My legs are walking and I label I'm walking. It's not like my legs are doing it and there's some invisible I that's being picked up and it's also walking without any legs, or I don't know how I would do that. But it feels that way, right? This person hurt me. Hurt me. I was hurt by what they said. If you dig deeper, it was a feeling that was hurt. What feeling was that? My pleasant feeling. It's turned into an unpleasant feeling. So based on that unpleasant feeling, I label I'm miserable. Because it's a mind that's miserable. But it always feels like there's something more than just that labeled I. There's a sense, and I've said that many times, that I label it I because it is already an I, instead of the way it actually is. It's only an I because I labeled it. Exactly the other way around, right? We believe, I say I think I, because there's an I in the first place, which is why I refer to it as I. No, it's because I'm thinking I, that the I exists in the first place. When we hear that, that seems pretty nihilistic, doesn't it? But in actuality, when you say I write a letter, we would all agree that is true. But if the I existed on top of being merely labeled, then not only your hand would be writing a letter, there would also be an I that writes a letter. Show me that I. Show me that I, that parallel to your hand is writing a letter. No, it's merely labeled. Show me the I that is meditating besides your mind meditating. So you sit down, you're meditating, and just because you sit cross-legged and, with your hands in a certain position, you wouldn't say you meditate. It's the mind. It's labeled on the basis of our mind. If you start to sit down, you start meditating, you label I meditate. That is correct. Because conventionally, that which is part of the I is considered to be mind and body. And whatever the body does or the mind does, based on that, we label I meditate, I walk, etc. That's totally correct in terms of worldly conventions. However, if I were to think, okay, my mind is meditating and so is my I, which is not just labeled, but it's somehow inherent in my mind and body, then I have a problem. Show me that mind. Show me that I, sorry. Is it separate from the mind? It's kind of like it seems to be the owner as well, isn't it? Anyway, having said all this, so from a Buddhist point of view, there is no such naturally independent of anything existing I. An I that, if you were just to take the time, you could somewhere find. Beyond, it would exist beyond labeling. So it would exist even if no one were to label the I, it would still be findable. That's the sense we have of an I. That is the sense of the I we have on a very subtle level. But perceiving this kind of I, there are coarser versions of that. There are coarser versions of that, where based on the sense there's something there. There's just something there, right? That's usually if I were to ask you, do you believe there's an I? And you say yes, and I ask you how exactly, can you define it? Not really, but there's something there, right? That's how we would respond. Because since we were born, we had that sense. But that is just the basis. Based on that, you may then feel the I is the controller. The I is in charge of mind and body. It feels at times like that, doesn't it? That's a slightly coarser version. The subtler version is just believing there to be an inherent I, holding on to something inherently, naturally there, different from mind and body, without specifying as a controller or anything. But based on that notion, there's something there. At certain times, we feel the I is the controller. The I is like a boss that controls mind and body. That sense of an I is not called a mind that perceives an inherently existent I, but it's called a mind that perceives a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. A self-sufficient, substantially existent. Again, the words are terrible. I mean, not they are terrible, I mean, with all respect, they're great. But in English, they don't mean much to us right now, right? The self-sufficient, okay, self-sufficient means something. But substantial and self-sufficient here mean the same thing. And it's important to understand beyond the term that this is a type of mind that holds onto an I that's like the controller. That's the boss. That is in control of mind and body, or that utilizes mind and body. That's a coarse type of, and usually we have those two types. They're inborn. At times, the subtler version, which is the top, it's the root. There's something there. There's something there beyond my perception. Beyond my labeling I. There's something more than that. Sometimes we just have that mind, and at other times, a slightly coarser version of that is the mind that perceives of a controller. That is the mind that perceives of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. These two minds we innately have. Can you recognize them in yourself? Probably the second version, the more coarser version, more readily than the first version. That's why it's called coarser. Coarse in the Tibetan in the Buddhist context usually means it's easier to recognize it, right? Coarser anger is always easily, I know when there's coarser anger, I want to strike someone, it's pretty obvious I'm angry. You can tell from my face, from my whole demeanor. A subtler type of anger, you could be still smiling, but very peaceful. Right? You may maybe call it passive-aggressive at the very most, if you notice it at all. I may not even notice. It's a subtler type of anger. It doesn't make me strike, or physically has no effect. It's too subtle, but it's still there. Similarly, when we talk about subtle anger, so in the same way as we talk about subtle anger and coarse anger, we talk about subtle misperception of reality, subtle misperception when it comes to the I, and a coarser type. The subtler type is, there's just something there. There's just something there. It pops up all the time. We may not even be aware of it. But when I feel like the I, right, if I think of myself as that controller of mind and body, at least in my case, I'm more familiar with the second type. Does that apply to you as well? Right? But that's just a coarser version. And those are both innate. Very important, both innate. But then you have what is called an intellectually acquired version. So based on these first two that we all have, we were all born with, now you add philosophy, you add cultural ideas of what the I is. Now in India, that version existed at the time of the Buddha because there were many philosophical systems at the time of the Buddha who accepted past and future lives, absolutely. They accepted reincarnation. They knew mind and body are, first of all, impermanent. They change all the time. They're made of parts. Okay? And then this person who has mind and body is reincarnated. So how is a self, and this question comes up a lot, if a self doesn't exist inherently, what is reincarnated? Right? That's a question that pops up a lot. Well, the non-Buddhist systems at the time of the Buddha, they said there must be a self. They definitely accepted the existence of the self, but now they had to distinguish it from mind and body. Because mind and body are not reincarnated. To them it was like the mind is not the same. If the mind was reincarnated, you should remember in your next life, what you've done before, because your mind goes with all its memories. So their argument was, the body's obviously not reincarnated. The mind, you still have to work to speak and, have to learn everything from scratch. So it can't be the mind. So only the I is reincarnated. But that I cannot be impermanent. Mind and body are impermanent, and you leave them behind. So the I has to be permanent. Mind and body have parts, and since the I is separate from them, it must be partless. And mind and body must exist, or the I has to exist independently from mind and body. Because otherwise it couldn't separate from them. If they were inseparably linked, you couldn't have the I reincarnate. That was the philosophical view of many systems in India. They thought there was a permanent I, mind and body being impermanent, that I was unchanging. And that also reflects our sense of the I as well. Our sense of a permanent I, right? I usually ask you this question. The sense of your I right now, is that the same I that came into this room quite a long time ago, an hour and a half ago? Oops, been talking for that long. An hour and a half ago, the I that is now sitting here, is that the same that came into this room? Yes or no? No, I'm not saying intellectually, I'm saying, what does it feel like? How does it feel? It feels like the same, right? Intellectual, that's different, but it feels like it's the same. Well, say hello to your sense of permanence, right? That's our sense of permanence. That's the same I that came into this room, and it's still the same I. If that's still the same I, then it means they're one. The I that came into this room and the I now. So it has to be permanent. Hasn't changed. It's the same I. Therefore, many of the non-Buddhist schools in India, well, possibly based on their sense that there's a permanent I, but also based on the argument if mind and body change and they're not reborn, the I must be permanent. Secondly, it must be partless, because mind and body cannot be its parts. If they're the parts of the mind, of the I, then they have to be reborn together with the I. Right? If something is a part of something, then if one is reborn, everything else is reborn together. Which means, yes, mind and body have parts, but the I doesn't have parts. It's partless, it's unitary. And it can exist independent of mind and body. Because mind and body are left behind and the I is reborn. So you end up with a permanent, unitary, and autonomous I. Right? That was the sense of I. So if you look at many of the Buddhist schools, non-Buddhist schools that existed at the time of the Buddha, and that's important. Those schools were very important for the development of Buddhism. Because India at the time, it was an incredible country where people were very tolerant of each other when it came to their intellectual views. They learned from each other, but they also enhanced their knowledge based on each other. So they would learn the other schools, getting a full sense of, for instance, a permanent, partless, independent self, or permanent, unitary, and autonomous self, in order to understand that such a self cannot exist. It was not to refute the others, it was just to understand the Buddhist view better. So you would learn the other schools. And what's interesting, that mentality in India exists nowadays in the whole world. Right? I mean, nowadays we have access to every system. Basically, you just go online. In India, you didn't have, of course, we didn't have internet, of course, obviously, but you had all these different spiritual schools that would learn from each other, and they would, I guess, visit each other. I know from Nalanda University, it was not just that, not only monks lived there, lay people lived there as well, but also people from other traditions lived there, and they debated with each other. It was a process of learning. It was like an openness to learn from each other. That didn't mean you had to accept what the other person said, but it's very helpful to compare your own views with a view that is the opposite and see, does it hold up to analysis? And that's, of course, based on the Buddha's instructions. Don't accept anything I said. Analyze everything. Analyze it like you would analyze gold. Rub it and cut it and burn it to see whether it's of the kind of quality you require. So we should do this. And that's what happened in India. And the beauty is nowadays, we're in a similar situation. We have access to so many systems. At the click of our finger, at the click of a mouse, we can learn about these and compare them. Anyway, this is not what I'm trying to say mainly. So the main point is, there was this view of a permanent, partless, independent self. Or to put it the way Geshe Thupten Jinpa does, permanent, unitary, and autonomous self. Now, that is not something we're born with, that sense of a self. But look at modern psychology. What did Sigmund Freud say about the ego and the superego? Isn't it called the superego? Superego or something? Right? That sense of an ego. I mean, I don't know exactly the descriptions, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was like independent of mind and body. There was an ego, and then you have two egos on top of that, the superego. And it was permanent, independent of mind and body. I don't know about partless. Or the soul in many religions, in Christianity, for instance. What is the soul? Isn't that like the eye? Kind of, right? It's kind of the eye. I was hurt in my soul. Like, what is that soul? It seems like the essence of every person. And again, that can exist independently of mind and body. Because when you die, the soul goes to heaven, if you're lucky. And your body, stays here, basically. So we have that notion as well, in the West as well. We don't really have a whole philosophy around it, that we discuss it in school, or, it's just mentioned and no one really knows what it means. But there's a notion there is that separate I. That is an intellectually acquired sense of an I, based on our innate sense. So these three are always mentioned when it comes to no self. The intellectually acquired one of like a pea in a jar, right? An autonomous, permanent, unitary self. That's like the jar is like mind and body, and the pea inside is like the soul, is like the self, right? So that is impossible from a Buddhist point of view. And then the second type of self that is impossible is a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. That although connected with the aggregates, right? So not like totally independent, is still the master of the aggregates, the controller. That's impossible either. Try and find that. Where's that controller? Which is very interesting. In modern science, for instance, neuroscientists have, of course, tried to find that controller in the brain. Where's the control center in the brain? And haven't been able to find it. And there's also a guy called David or Daniel Masiago or something. I have to look it up again. I'll tell you about him next time. He talks about this split, the split brain. When people had like like when you cut the connection between left and right brain, when some people have two egos become active. I've read about this quite a while ago, so I don't remember all the details. But so his analysis, or his conclusion is the self is just a projection of the mind. He basically says something very similar. I'll let you know next time. It's just a projection of the mind. It's the coming together of different parts of the brain, in particular left and right, and those working together create this illusion of a solid I. Sounds familiar? This is where science, at least some scientists, have come to now. And it shows that Buddhism and science are actually becoming closer and closer in so many ways. And it's fascinating. It's so fascinating how many similarities there are between Buddhism and science. I've given you a few classes ago, we talked about the benefits of great compassion. I had a whole list, physical and mental benefits that scientists have found. Aging is slowed down when you meditate on great compassion. Throw away your wrinkle cream, just right? I gave you the reason, the telomeres and everything. So this is fascinating in that way, that Buddhism and science have come so much closer. But the point is here, the point I was trying to make is this person who's also investigating our sense of I, and from what he says, it sounds very similar to the Buddhist ideas. But leaving that aside, here, what does Lama Tsongkhapa say? He says that if you understand that sentient beings are disintegrating moment by moment, you understand it's impossible to have a permanent, unitary and autonomous self, because you have no permanent self. So even though you don't necessarily understand right away that there is no unitary self or no autonomous self, but at least you know there can't be something that is all three. Once you understand subtle impermanence, it's impossible for the first characteristic of permanence to hold up, I mean to be realistic or to be in accordance with reality. It's impossible that a self that is changing moment by moment is permanent. So therefore you cannot have a self that has all three characteristics. So first you understand there's no common locus of something permanent, unitary, and autonomous. One is then able to ascertain on the basis of that. So that permanent falls away. So there's no self that has these three characteristics. One is then able to ascertain the absence of sentient beings that possess a reality separate from their aggregates. Autonomous. You can understand it's impossible to have a self that exists separate from mind and body. Right? So that is also part of this process. Understanding the self. Previously, in the previous lesson class, I think I mentioned understanding subtle impermanence takes us very close to understanding selflessness, right? If there's only a mind and body that constantly changing, where does that permanent I fit in? Yeah. So that's the first step. First, we understand, based on subtle impermanence, that the I cannot be permanent, partless, and autonomous, right? This permanent kind of soul, no way. Permanent ego and superego, no way, right? The second step is to understand the I is not autonomous. It doesn't exist as a reality separate from the aggregates. Possible. So one is then able, which means after that, able to ascertain the absence of sentient beings that possess a reality separate from their aggregates. So there's no sentient being, no self, no I, separate from the aggregates. To understand sentient beings to be designated upon the mere collection of aggregates. So it's on the basis of mind and body we talk about self. Not separate. It'd be absurd. If I had a separate I wouldn't be aging. Mind and body would be aging. Mind wouldn't be aging. If someone, hits me over the head, I'm not hit over the head because it's my body. Nothing would make sense. But why do we say I'm aging? Because my body is aging. Why do I say I'm miserable? Because my mind is miserable. So in the end, it all comes down to the collection of aggregates, which is just another way of saying my body and my different minds. Okay. So that's what we come to understand. Based on understanding impermanence, we understand there can't be one permanent, partless, independent self. Based on that, we can come to understand that there is no independent self, a self existing separate from mind and body. And we come to understand it exists in relation to mind and body. It's labeled, it's designated on the basis of mind and body. Right? The body ages, I say I age. It's not a separate I that's aging away without a body. Okay. Thus, it is referred to as taking phenomenal reality as its object. Understanding the impermanence of sentient beings, including ourselves, also understanding ourselves, but also understanding other sentient beings, because not only do we perceive ourselves to be permanent, perceive others to be permanent. What is the indication for that? A particular affliction, I've mentioned it a few times, that shows we perceive others to be permanent. What is that affliction? A type of anger. Holding a grudge. Holding a grudge. Because I'm still angry with this person who's harmed me last week. That's the guy. That's him who said that. No, that's not him. That's the former continuum. But I'm still as angry with this person right now. For me, that's the same person. Right? This is the same guy who said that to me. In my mind, intellectually, if I were to say, is that the same person? You go, no. Their mind and body has changed. Your anger tells you something different. Our afflictions are in control. Our emotions are in control. And they tell us something different. They tell us, same guy, better be angry with him now. Right? And we are angry. We resent this person, so we hold a grudge. It shows we even perceive others to be permanent. But once we understand impermanence, then we're slowly undoing the sense of solidity when it comes to ourselves, but also to others. So this is referred to as taking phenomenal reality as its object. Okay. The phrase impermanent sentient beings, does that make sense? So it's just explaining impermanence is so helpful because you're understanding something more about yourself and others. The phrase impermanent sentient beings is only an illustration. Taking sentient beings devoid of self-sufficient substantial reality as an object can also be referred to as compassion that takes the phenomenal reality as its object. In other words, initially it seems like from the analogy we heard, rippling water, blah, the whole thing, right? It's impermanence. But here it's indicated, and that's also clear from when we study Parching, for instance, there it's the same explanation is given, that you can have the second type of great compassion being actively there, that is directly conjoined not with a mind that realizes impermanence, but that realizes the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. The lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I is not emptiness. That's the lack of the inherent existence of the I. But it's a coarser type of selflessness. It's a coarser type. It's not called selflessness as such, but it's a coarser type. Does that make sense? The grasping onto a self-sufficient, substantially existent I is a coarser type of self-grasping. Therefore, understanding the opposite, the absence of such a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, you understand a coarser type of selflessness. That's a huge step. Understanding subtle impermanence is huge. So difficult, not easy, but very rewarding once you realize it. And before we can even tackle inherent existence, we should meditate on the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, a controller, in other words. And a lot of the meditations we do on emptiness are really initially on that particular self. Like, get a sense of yourself, the way you felt hurt when someone embarrassed you in front of other people, etc. What appears to you is very much that sense of a controller, right? A separate entity. And then it's like, where is it? Is it separate from the mind? So really, it's just that coarse type of a self-sufficient, substantial I, really, when you think about it. And only later on, once we get to understanding it's not there, all right, so that's out of the way. But then we may have a sense, okay, but there's still something there. And that's when we start tackling the inherent I. Something's still there. Not the controller, not in charge. Okay, I can accept that's not there. But there must be something there. There must be something. Nah, that's not enough. That's just not enough. There must be something there from the side of the object. It's not just dependent on my mind. That's very... It seems like, no, that's nihilism. Right? Okay. Anyway, as we've just heard, the second type of compassion, great compassion, can be directly conjoined either with subtle impermanence, focusing on sentient beings, or focusing on the fact, or it can be directly conjoined with the mind that realizes that the self, other sentient beings, do not exist self-sufficiently and substantially. In other words, they don't exist as these entities that control their own mind and bodies. Right? Yeah, so that kind of compassion that is conjoined with such a knowledge greatly enhances. It moves even further towards reality, away from our misperception. I did see there was a question, but I'm leaving it. I want to go a little further. Okay. Yes, I'm going to address this soon. All right. So when the phrase taking the phenomenal reality as its object is used for taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality, the modifier mere is left implicit. Again, I don't think this is... I think there's a mistake here. In Tibetan, it says something slightly different. It basically says you have a truncation here. Does everyone know the word truncation? In some translations, in Jeffrey Hawkins' translation, he says it's a contraction, but it's not a contraction. Where you say, taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality. So you take away, you leave out the words in the middle, sentient beings merely designated upon their, and you have taking phenomenal reality, right? Just take these two words. So that's the truncation. In Tibetan, it basically says, this is the name of this great compassion, spelled out, but then you just leave out some words, and the shorter version is compassion that takes phenomenal reality as its object. Right? So you can leave out sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality. So in Tibetan, it literally says the name of the second type of compassion. If you spell it out, it would be great compassion that takes sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality. That's how it's spelled out. But that's too long. So leave out the words in the middle. That's what it says in Tibetan. So you don't mention the words in the middle, and you end up saying great compassion, taking phenomenal reality. Right? So that's a truncation. It's not a contraction. It's not even an abbreviation. It's where you leave out some words in a term. I even looked up there are other examples of truncations. What is it? Instead of International Criminal Court, you call it Criminal Court. Instead of saying World Health Organization headquarters, you call it World Health Headquarters, apparently. That's like this, you have a longer version and you have a shorter version. And in Tibetan is full of truncations. Like when we debate, the usual longer words, you leave out the syllables. For instance, when you say Pumba Zimbe Mishe. Pumba means vas, Zimba means apprehend, Mishe means eye consciousness. Eye consciousness apprehending a vase. We like to use that example, right? Eye consciousness apprehending a vase. You don't say Bumba Zimba Mishe, you say Bum Zim Mishe, right? Eye consciousness app vase. If you wanted to, right? In English it doesn't make sense. So in that way, a lot of Tibetan terminology is abbreviated. Now here Lama Tsongkhapa kindly explains how we came to this odd term, right? Literally, the second type of compassion is great compassion focusing on phenomena. Chöla mikbe ninje. So compassion focusing on sentient being, focusing on phenomena. But focusing, it's too loud?
Just a little interference.
Okay, I'm fine actually. I don't feel hot now. I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, great, thank you. So the actual term is great compassion taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality. That's the whole word, the whole thing, or taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomena, upon their reality, basically. But shortened, it shortens to great compassion focusing on phenomena. That's the truncation, that's the short version. So the modifier mir is left implicit. It doesn't say that in Tibetan. I don't know where that comes from, but I may just not understand it. So I'm not negating it, I'm just saying I don't understand it. In Tibetan it literally says you leave out these, you don't mention those middle words. Then you come up with this particular name of this particular type of compassion. Alright. Then the third type of compassion that takes no reference as its object also does not focus merely on sentient beings. It focuses specifically on sentient beings devoid of intrinsic existence. Of course, it literally doesn't do that. Its conjoined mind does that. But Lama Tsongkhapa puts it that way because Chandrakirti put it this way in his auto-commentary. So he's got no choice. He can't change it too much. But of course, what it means is great compassion is conjoined with a mind that focuses on that. Okay. It focuses specifically on sentient beings devoid of intrinsic existence. So just to remind you, you have great compassion, and together with it, a mind that knows, that realizes the emptiness of sentient beings. No reference means no object of apprehension is clung to through the mind grasping at signs, grasping at inherent existence. Right? Grasping at signs is just another way of saying inherent existence, holding on to something solidly there, concretely there. Thus, it refers to the absence of true or inherent existence. Yeah? All right. So it's a mind that realizes the opposite. There is nothing that exists independently of being merely labeled. There's nothing that can be found beyond being merely labeled. Okay, so that's what the mind knows. In this way, taking sentient beings qualified by lack of true existence as its object. As its object is referred to as compassion that takes no reference as its object. Or non-referential compassion. Again, with some of the words left out. But then he says again, with the modifier mere left implicit. I think this is probably just a copy-paste case, where in the previous case he just copy and pasted it. There's not even the word mere in that longer version of the title. So I think it's simply a typo. In the second case, with the modifier mere, because compassion takes no reference as its object, there is no word mere in there that can be left out. In the previous version, okay, you have taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomenal reality. There's a word mere in there. But you leave out more than the word mere. You leave out, half a sentence basically, in order to get to the short version of the word. It's not super important, but I'm spending so much time explaining this because I want you to read this text and understand it and not go, what's going on, right? It's not super important, but he explains why this term was coined, how it was coined, and how it was later then shortened. I mean, how this truncation came about. Many Tibetan commentators assert that the second compassion, the one with realizing impermanence, itself perceives sentient beings as disintegrating moment by moment. Aha! Here he clarifies it. And that the third compassion itself perceives being as devoid of intrinsic existence. These pronouncements portray a lack of correct understanding of the focal object versus the cognitive or apprehended aspect of these compassions. So here it's very clear. Previously, Lama Tsongkhapa put it the way Chandrakirti did. But now he's saying, no, the focal object, it's the same kind of great compassion. Nothing has changed about great compassion itself. What has changed is the other mind that runs parallel, that enhances great compassion. And of course, the person now taking to mind both, in their continuum, you have great compassion and you have the realization of the impermanence of sentient beings. Their focal object is different, right? They have two focal objects. Sentient beings as part of their great compassion and the impermanence of sentient beings as part of their wisdom, both actively present in their mind, in their continuum. So therefore Lama Tsongkhapa says, no. Great compassion is the same. Both of these compassions must be accepted as having a cognitive or apprehended aspect, wishing sentient beings to be free of suffering. They're exactly the same in that way. However, momentariness or impermanence, subtle impermanence, and the absence of intrinsic existence were asserted to be their cognitive aspects, their apprehended aspects, a single instance of compassion would possess, insofar as its held objects are concerned, as far as its apprehended objects are concerned, two dissimilar apprehended aspects. That's impossible. You cannot have one mind that perceives suffering of sentient beings and impermanence of sentient beings. You can't have one mind doing that. You can change quickly. One mind can quickly switch back and forth. But one mind, if you perceive, for instance, the impermanence of sentient beings, you can't perceive the emptiness of sentient beings with that same mind. It's impossible. That's important. So one object at a time. You can have two minds. having their own apprehended objects, as we've just seen. But one mind, not possible. Right? Does that make sense? That's something to think about and to debate on. Have I never seen two things at the same time? But two things at the same time is different to saying perceiving A as B and D as F or something. Right? That's different. Versus just seeing two people in front of me. That's different. Yeah. All right. This said, it is the case that to take sentient beings qualified by these characteristics as a focal object, characterized by impermanence, characterized by emptiness. The person who possesses, now it's talking about the person, who possesses these two types of compassion within his mental continuum, must first ascertain sentient beings to be momentary, or in the other case, devoid of intrinsic existence, and on that basis, have the aspect of these two facts appear to his mind. All right? So in the case of the mind realizing impermanence, that appears to his mind. In the case of the emptiness of sentient beings, that appears to his mind. It's one or the other. But it doesn't mean that his compassion itself needs to perceive the beings in these terms. So compassion, first you understand, for instance, in the case of the second type of compassion, first you meditate on the impermanence of sentient beings, meditate on that, and then you generate great compassion, while your mind realizing the impermanence of sentient beings is still active. So you have both. But that doesn't mean that your great compassion changes in any way, except it's enhanced, but its object remains the same. Or alternatively, you first generate an understanding, you meditate on the emptiness of sentient beings, and let's say you've understood the emptiness, you realize it, then once that realization is actively in your mental continuum, then you also generate great compassion. Now, great compassion is enhanced by this other mind, but its object is still the same, focusing on all sentient beings. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. Great. So today we got actually a little further. Very good. We've covered a lot. My apologies for that. I mean, it's a little overwhelming, but Buddhist philosophy is overwhelming. There's a lot. But let me just summarize it quickly before I take some questions. I've got already some questions here in the group. Let me summarize what we discussed. I spoke about these three types of great compassion. Great compassion that is not directly conjoined with any other mind. That's straightforward. And then the second type of great compassion, which is just like the first type of compassion in terms of the mind and its object, but this time it's directly conjoined with another mind that runs parallel to it, that is manifest at the same time, that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings. And that enhances, therefore, great compassion through that understanding, because it's a mind that is part of the wisdom aspect, it's understanding reality. The third version of this mind is, instead of being conjoined, the great compassion here is not conjoined with the mind realizing impermanence, but it is conjoined with an understanding of emptiness of sentient beings. Again, greatly enhancing great compassion. We've also heard that the second type of mind is not exclusively only conjoined, was not exclusively conjoined with the mind that realizes impermanence. It can also be conjoined with the mind that realizes the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. All right. But we've also heard in this context that when we talk about understanding the impermanence of sentient beings, understanding they change all the time, that we ourselves change all the time, sentient beings are changing, it's very difficult, first of all, to uphold our sense of a permanent I that we innately all have. We did the test. Remember, I asked you this question. Same I, different I. So once you understand subtle impermanence of yourself and other sentient beings, then you can definitely negate that there is a permanent, partless, autonomous I, as some of the non-Buddhist philosophical schools at the time of the Buddha asserted. Atman, that particular type of self. that you can negate. So there's impossible. If you don't have a permanent I, you don't have a permanent part, this autonomous I. The next step is then to understand there's no autonomous I, right? First you understand there's nothing that's all three, because there's nothing that is permanent. But now you take it further to understanding there's no autonomous I. There's no self that exists separate from mind and body. And from there you take it further. You come to understand that I is dependent on mind and body, but still that there can't be a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. Now, someone called Mac asked, is there like a list of all these words? I don't have a list. They are online. I think there are some online glossaries that you can look up. But sometimes what's not helpful, when I say self-sufficient, substantially existent I, the words themselves, you need to know what's behind that. Because the word substantially existent does not mean a controller of mind and body in normal terms. It's well, self-sufficient kind of points in that direction, but it's not as specific as saying the I is like a controller. So yeah, there's a glossary available online, but you have to look for it. And unfortunately, not everyone agrees with using this terminology in the same way. So if you're more familiar with it, you recognize it. Yeah. But anyway, so there's no self-sufficient, substantially existent I. And so based on that, we come eventually to understand there's also no inherent I. Right? So these two great compassions, or three types almost, if you like. So understanding the impermanence of sentient beings, understanding that sentient beings don't exist self-sufficiently, substantially, or as a controller of mind and body, and understanding they don't exist inherently. That we combine with great compassion, making both truly powerful. You make both, you enhance both. You enhance your great compassion, make that more powerful, because it's now based on an understanding of sentient beings. And of course, this great compassion enhances your wisdom, because now you learn how to utilize it for the benefit of other sentient beings. Your wisdom doesn't just help you, it also helps you working towards becoming a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Right? Okay. Anyway, yeah, that's basically all I want to say today. Then we had a short discussion about the longer version of the terms, the terms of the second and the third type of compassion, with some words being left out. Never mind. And of course, Lama Tsongkhapa specified again, even though we keep talking about same focal object and so forth, don't get confused. It doesn't mean great compassion is not the same in all three cases. It only differs in terms of what it is conjoined with, right? Because otherwise you have one mind with two different apprehended aspects, and that doesn't work. You can't have that. You can have two minds having different apprehended aspects running parallel at the same time, but you can't have one mind perceiving, I don't know, the impermanence of sentient beings and wishing them to be free from suffering. One mind can't do that. Buddha's mind is different, but we're not talking about Buddha's mind. We're talking now about sentient beings' minds. All right. And then there's one question by B. Is great compassion always conjoined only with another virtuous mind? What would you say? Don't agree with me. You know what it means? Okay, I'll specify. Conjoined with means they enhance each other. To conjoin with doesn't mean like, one is hooked to the other, because it's not a physical object. It's not like, we use a term that's usually used in a more physical sense, like kind of conjoined, or we think of it in a physical sense possibly, but of course it's non-physical. So what does conjoined mean? It means if one mind is conjoined with great compassion, then great compassion is enhanced by that mind, and great compassion enhances the mind. They enhance each other. So can great compassion enhance a non-virtuous mind? Can great compassion, or can a non-virtuous mind enhance great compassion? No, right? So yes, and therefore in answer to B's question, it's impossible, because there's no way that they enhance each other, right? When great compassion and wisdom are both active, how does this work since they have different objects? And our mental consciousness is said to hold only one object at a time. Yeah, one mental consciousness holds only one object at a time, but we will have two mental consciousnesses. So this is difficult. That's why I think I also made that mistake last time. One of the reasons that I thought it cannot be active at the same time. For us ordinary people, it's difficult. For us ordinary beings to have two mental consciousnesses run at the same time, I think you need a certain degree of focus, and yeah, I don't think that is actually possible. I'm not sure. But once you've control, I mean, a lot of Buddhist practice is about learning to control your mind. So the mental stream, right? The mental stream that usually just runs as a single mental stream can become two streams, and then those streams join together again. So the analogy of like our mind being like a water stream, like a continuing stream, works quite nicely here, even though usually we have 6 streams, 5 sense consciousnesses and 1 mental consciousness. That mental consciousness can kind of split and then become one again. So it does work, but a single mind cannot. Since they have different, our mental consciousness is said to hold only one object. Yeah, when you say our mental consciousness, that's singular. One mental consciousness can only hold one, but if you say 2 mental consciousness, that's different. But again, you have to be quite advanced to be able to do that. I'm pretty sure of it, yeah. We have time for one more question. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to say, it doesn't sound like 2 mental minds, 2 minds, because it means I don't want, like the object is sentient beings, and the wish, I don't want them to suffer.
Yes.
And then you said A is B, so sentient beings who are permanent, who are impermanent, I don't want them to suffer. So it doesn't sound like it's 2 minds, it sounds like it's one mind with
an additional characteristic.
extension.
An extension. So your question is, I'll repeat it just for those online. Your question is, it doesn't seem like for the first type of compassion you need 2 minds in the first place. You could just have one mind, which is the mind that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering, but these sentient beings are characterized by being impermanent. Okay. What do you mean with they're characterized by being impermanent? Are you saying I'm perceiving impermanent sentient beings, so I'm perceiving sentient beings, and since they're impermanent, I perceive impermanent sentient beings? Or are you saying, not only do I want them to be free from suffering, I'm also aware they're impermanent? If it's the first case, you perceive just impermanent sentient beings, yeah, if you perceive a table, you perceive an impermanent table. There are no permanent tables, so the only table you perceive is an impermanent table, but that doesn't mean the mind is aware of that. My eye consciousness perceives an impermanent table. Does my eye consciousness know it's impermanent? No. Therefore, in the case of the first case, yes, this great compassion perceives impermanent sentient beings and wants them to be free from suffering. But what it actually is aware of, what it actually apprehends, is not impermanence. It just happens to perceive sentient beings that are impermanent. In the second case, you have 2 apprehended objects. The second case would be, not only does it perceive sentient beings that happen to be impermanent, no, it is aware that sentient beings are impermanent. It knows sentient beings are impermanent. And then you have a problem. It is aware of, it wants them to be free from suffering, and it knows that they're impermanent. One mind can't do that. You have one mind with 2 different apprehended objects. Suffering of sentient beings and the fact that they're impermanent. That doesn't work. So there's no extension, or there is an extension there, but that's always there, and the mind is not aware of it, because impermanent sentient beings and sentient beings are the same. If you perceive one, you perceive the other, without knowing they're impermanent. Yeah? But this is important. Yeah, that's an important question. That comes up in the debates, actually. In one of our debate manuals, exactly that debate comes up, basically. So, don't you perceive impermanent sentient beings? And the answer to that question is, yeah, you do, because whenever you perceive a sentient being, you perceive an impermanent sentient being, but that doesn't mean the mind is aware of it. Yeah. Great. Well done. We did go through quite a bit. Well, last time we couldn't have class because there was a power cut. Some of you may remember. I want to reschedule this class. I don't know when. Should I do it on Monday? Or should I wait until the last class and just add another class?
Monday.
Monday? You want Monday? You guys are okay Monday? I don't know whether you have time or not, but if for some reason you disagree, you could indicate that. No disagreement. All right, so let's do it Monday. Let's have an extra class on Monday to catch up on what we couldn't do yesterday, the day before yesterday. Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. So all that's left is to dedicate. Now let's take a moment to dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated today together here, studying this precious text. Thinking may become a cause for us to generate great compassion, the realization of emptiness and everything else that is needed in order to eventually become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of every sentient being. And in the meantime, may our positive potential cause our great masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, those who embody the teachings, to have a long and healthy life, to continue to guide us through their words and their example. And lastly, may whatever positive potential we've accumulated affect the people around us in a positive way, so that their compassion and their wisdom may slowly increase. Okay, with that in mind, let's recite the dedication prayers. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. The brave Manjushri and also Samantabhadra realize things as they are. Hence, in order to be able to follow their example, I dedicate these merits in the best way. With the dedication praised as supreme by the victorious ones of the three times, I completely dedicate all these roots of virtue so that I might engage in the noble bodhisattva deeds. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right, thank you. Have a great weekend and maybe see you on Monday.